Okay, we've got our bouncing ball. Now what we want to do is we want to start messing around with the rate at which it bounces and the height at which it bounces. That is to say, the timing and spacing of it, so that we can get the ball to feel the effects of gravity and eventually roll to a stop. We're going to start off by bouncing it less and less till it stops, and then we're going to add some motion on the z-axis to get the feeling of a ball that is bouncing and then rolling to a stop. So we've got our guy here who's bouncing the way he oughta. We can get rid of this one, delete. We've got our guy bouncing in Y, and so really it's as simple as it seems. We're going to make our length of the shot a little longer. Let's try 180. Okay, so essentially, just to make the ball appear to be losing its steam as it bounces, all we need to do is lessen the height. Now you'll notice when we whatever I'm animating is being picked up as our cycle through infinity. So we don't really need to worry about infinity anymore, since this is no longer a cycle. This is a ball doing something a little more organic. So we can turn off our infinity view, not worry about it anymore. And right now we're just going to worry about translating in Y. So what that means is we can set a key here. I can set the keys sort of arbitrarily, because I'm going to mess with them anyway, and this is something we're going to do mainly visually. So I've just set some keys here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this key, this is the next apex, so I want each apex to be a little bit lower than the next one. This is the next ground plane, so that's going to be 0. And then this is the one after that, that's going to be 0 as well, etc., etc. So now I know it doesn't look like much now, but we're going to get to it. So now when I middle mouse moving this thing around, I can move it in all directions, but what I want to do is when I'm just changing the value of something, I only want to be able to change it north-south, that is to say the value. I don't want to change it east-west, that is to say the time. So I've got it highlighted. If I shift middle mouse, if I go left-right, no matter what I do, it's going to stay on that value. And if I go up-down, no matter what I do, it's going to stay on that time. So shift is very helpful in that regard. Oh, okay, now I have actually lowered the bottom one to a little bit lower than these. These guys are actually at 0.783, so I can pick both of these and then put them at 0.783. So now they're all the same. Again, I'm going to break these tangents, and I'm going to break these two tangents, and now I'm going to start, and then I think I'm just going to add one more key here and bring it down to 0.783. while holding shift. 0.852. I'm sure that's close enough. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so I've got essentially 5 bounces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you can see this needs a lot of work, but it doesn't take long to whip it into shape. So I'm going to do something like this. Lower this guy a little bit. And so now basically I'm just sort of massaging these curves to get them to do what I want them to do. Now, as a ball bounces less, it's not only does it bounce with a lower height, but since it's not bouncing as high, it's not going to take as long to come back down to earth. So I'm changing the spacing, that is to say the height, and the timing, that is to say how long each bounce takes, how many frames each bounce takes to finish. And also, I'm going to change each of the tangents individually to make them all look kind of the way tangents should with regard to a bouncing ball. So this seems pretty good. This last one's going to be really low because that's the last one before the roll. Okay. This one just a little bit lower. Alright, I think this guy could be a bit lower. These guys could all come in a bit, I think. And now this could come in a bit like this. This may seem somewhat ridiculous, but this kind of obsessive attention to detail. It's just something that to do character animation you have to have. There's no avoiding it. Sorry to say. And if you think I'm driving you crazy with this, just ask any of my students and they'll say, yep, he will drive you crazy. But that's really what separates the great animators. Aside from technical knowledge, the application of fundamentals is just a dogged willingness to make things perfect. So let's just take a look now and see how it feels. We can just play it right now and just see how it's feeling. Okay, so now even though we can't see infinity, we can see that it's still looping, because once it gets past the end here, it starts its infinity loop again. So let's just shorten this to, actually, let's take this and do curves, post-infinity, constant. So now when we view infinity, we're going to see that it's constant. Alright, so now when it finishes, it's just going to roll through there like that. Now, right now we're just playing it in Maya, and so since it's just a ball and it's a really light piece of geometry, it plays through at speed. But when you start tackling animation with heavier rigs, you're going to want to start to do play blasts to to really get the feel of what the actual timing is. So we're going to open this up. We'll just open up the window to take a look at it. Right now it's going to play a play blast at a full scale, which means the full screen. That's not really necessary. I knock it down to 50 or so, and that should do it. So let's do a play blast here. Take a look and see how the thing really looks in real time. Okay, so that's a pretty slow bounce, huh? So what we can do is we can take the whole thing and scale it up. Right, and that's R. If we select these, select Y, it's going to scale up from the point at which the cursor is. So if I pick it from the bottom, it's going to scale up like that. Now let's take a look at it. We just scaled it a little bit. Woo! There we go. That's fun. I don't know if it needed to be scaled that much, but it feels a little more natural, huh? All right, so let's just take it down just a hair. Okay, let's try that. Okay, great. So we've got our animation of our ball bouncing north-south, and now what we're going to do is we're going to move it through space on the translate Z axis, so that we get the feel of that it's actually bouncing left to right and then rolling to a stop. So let's get to it. Okay, so let's take this translate Z, pick all the unnecessary keys, which in this case is all of them because it's not doing anything, and just blow them away. Delete. Now we just got the one key. Since that was a flat line anyway, it's not going to affect the animation at all. Anytime a line is flat, that's nothing. So we're basically bouncing the ball from here all the way until here, where it kind of ends and goes through to our last key in Y. So let's make our last key in Y our last key in Z. I can just key just this one. Cool, and that's going to put that key right there. You can see it like that. Now we want to see how far do we want this ball to go. We can just take it, we can start it here, and let's just take this line here. Now we can either highlight it in the channel box, middle mouse drag to the place we like, which is about there, or if we want we can grab it in the graph editor and shift, move it up, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now what we're going to want to do is, since the ball is bouncing the most at the beginning, it's going to be moving the most in Z. So the higher the angle, the more it's going to move. Okay, and as a ball rolls to a stop, that's when it moves the least. And so the flatter the line, the less something moves. So if you get a line like that, that's a slow out, and that is going to represent something that looks kind of like it's gradually slowing down. It's great when you're doing character animation. If you want to do a character who sighs, you know, they sort of draw in a breath and then go, ah, and then kind of end really, they start a little faster than the way they end. This is the type of curve that's going to really show that. So now we can pull out a little bit more to see it and take a look at what that's going to do. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. All right. But you'll notice there's I set my cycle at the wrong length, so it kind of did that funny thing. Let's try it one more time. Shift that a little more. Okay. Boing, 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 boing. Shoop. All right. So that's kind of the idea. All right. So now we can get into putting spin on this ball so it actually looks like it's spinning properly, but in this case, this would be, I believe, no, not rotate Y, rotating in X. Yeah, so a ball that's moving left to right is going to rotate in X this way. We can mess with that, but it's not particularly important because generally speaking, the rigs you're going to work on aren't really going to need to do that sort of thing, so I'd rather save the time so we can get straight into the fun stuff, okay? Now that being said, before we do that, this piece of animation, it's getting there, but it's still missing something fairly crucial, which is squash and stretch, okay? Maybe it is a little distracting to not see that thing spin, so if I just click in the space, that will select this, and now we won't see those lines. They won't indicate that it's not spinning. So, okay, now it feels to me like that middle bounce there is just still a little too low. So I'm just going to heighten that a little bit and heighten that. Doesn't really matter. And now just get this tangent going. A little more. A little more. Cool. All right. Okay, so now we want to get squash and stretch in there. Basically, the idea behind squash and stretch is to show how things what happens to bodies when they start moving through space faster and slower. Generally speaking, the faster something is moving through space, the more stretch is going to be on it. The more impact there is for something, the more it is going to squash. So let's put a little bit of that on this bad boy and see what it looks like. All right, squash and stretch. Now we've got a ball that's bouncing pretty good. We feel okay about how where it's moving and where it's going, but it's got no impact. Okay. Okay. Now again, it feels to me like there's something a little funny in this middle bounce here. So let's just take a quick look at that. Translate Y. Yeah, it doesn't look quite as nice as it oughta. I know this is ridiculous, but I want to get you guys used to being perfectionists, because that's what an animator has to be. You have to have this sense of not being able to go to sleep at night until it's perfect. It's a blessing and a curse, believe me, but as far as animating goes, it's a blessing. So, or at least a necessary evil. Okay, so we've got this thing that's bouncing. It still feels a little funny, maybe just a little higher. Sorry, guys. All right. So now we got this thing that's bouncing. It's doing its thing, but it still has no squash and stretch, which is a very important element to what we're doing. All right. So I do think that this needs to be a little shorter here, just while we're still messing with our... This is still what would really be considered the blocking phase. So you're always free to mess with your timing in the blocking stage to get it to where you really want it to look exactly like how it's supposed to. There we go. Okay, that feels pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to add our squash and stretch to it, which is really going to give it that feeling of bounce and impact. It's already getting there. It's looking pretty good, but it needs to have squash and stretch. There's no really good piece of animation that doesn't at least, if not incorporating squash and stretch, doesn't at least animate to that sense. And what I mean by that is impact. When a ball is bouncing off the ground, it's squashed. So in this case, the ball is bouncing vertically in Y. So let's squash it down to 0.7. So now it's flatter. F, there we go. So now it's flatter, but it's still just as big on the side, so that what that means is it's shrunk. So what we need to do is pick scale X and Z, control to pick both of those and make those 1.4. Okay? So now it's flatter but bigger around the sides. So basically the idea is it's not shrinking, it's just changing its shape. So we want to try to get the feeling of mass in this ball so that it feels like the ball's not growing and shrinking, just that it's changing shape. Okay, so now what we want to do is, this is where we really want to show contrast, and this is where we can see how as the ball changes shape it adds to the sense of impact. So at the ground it's flat. At the apex of its trip, it is, I don't know why there's a key on 12 there, so we don't need that. Okay, at the apex of its flight, strictly speaking from a physics point of view, about the apex of its flight has no forces acting on it whatsoever. Gravity has not yet kicked in, and it is not stretching because it has slowed down to, for one moment in time, it's slowed down to nothing before it starts to drop. So ideally the ball would be in perfect round there, and as flat as it's going to be here on the ground. Now this is where contrast comes in. Contrast is a crucial element to animation, and it's something that I'm going to be talking about all through this video. It's definitely part of animating characters and making actions believable, and it's just a necessary part of the movement of things in this world. And so we're going to get our first real sense of what contrast is like in shape. We've already got contrast in movement. This translate Y is that nice bounce there. That's contrast in movement, but now we want to get contrast in shape. So we want to get from here to there. The only problem is that when a ball is on the ground, on its bounce, strictly speaking, it's still in time for a moment as well. And then it's moving fastest in the frame immediately after it's still, and in the frame immediately before it's still. So we want to get the most speed here, right next to the place where there's no speed. And so therefore the shape is going to change the most. When a ball's on the ground from impact, that's where it's flattest, but when it's moving fastest, that's where it's stretched the most, and that's where you get the squash and stretch. So right here we want to reverse these two. So the scale on Y is 1.4. Scale on X and Z might be 0.7. Okay, so now we really get that feeling of contrast in shape. Okay, so that's what's going to give it the feeling of impact and motion. Now it's going to, if you hit Alt and hit these arrows to the right of the M and the N, then you can toggle frame by frame. Now you can see it's gradually getting back up. But when we play it, it's still going to look a little funny, because usually it doesn't take a ball that long to regain its shape. So let's just pick the scale. All right, and we'll frame that. So what we really want is to get this sense that the scale is closer to regaining its shape about here, and it's not going to take it this long. So one thing we can do is we can set a key here. Now you have to be careful when you set keys with the S, because you're also going to set a key on all this other stuff. So this is a case where you want to key just the elements you're keying. All right, so I'm going to Control Z, and what that is, that's where the channel box comes in handy. You go there and you just do key selected. So now we see there's no key here on translate and rotate. There's just a key on a scale. So when we frame it here, now what we can do is, if we take this and just move it over here and then spline it, so because when it's flattened, it comes down like that, then flattens and then shrinks again. That's going to look a little funny. If we spline it like that, that might be a little too much. Maybe we want to try clamped. Nah, that's not good. So this is one where we're going to want to highlight it and just sort of mess with the tangents a little bit to sort of get that nice organic line there. So now it's going to regain its shape a lot sooner, and it's going to slow out to its perfect shape. That may be a little much, I'm not sure. We'll mess with it, but this is sort of the basic idea. And this is a basic lesson in how to manipulate the lines to sort of get the look you want. So we get the nice bounce, and that contrast in shapes gives us that nice bounce, and then gradually as it reaches its height, it's back to its shape. But then it comes down to its fastest point right before it hits the ground too. So we want to take that shape. So we want to take this shape here and bring it here, which is where middle mouse drag comes into play. So we drag from 2 to 32, and there again, key selected. Okay, so there it is. We've selected it. We've keyed our scale, but translate and everything else is still fine. So now we get again. Okay, so now we get this. We get this nice sort of, again, it feels like it's probably getting a little too stretchy a little too soon. So if we look at this, it's basically the same idea. Maybe we would just want to go here. We can always just too, if you want, you can just key select it and just bring these values in a little tighter, so it's holding its shape a little bit more for a little longer. But then it is going to start to stretch as it gets closer to the ground. Okay. And now the one last thing we want to do is take this, the flatness from frame 1, drag it over to frame 33, key the scale. All right, now there's our last little bit of contrast. Okay. Now one other thing we need to do is, now we do want to do a little bit of rotating in X, because it's stretching in Y, but it's stretching due vertically but moving in space a little bit, translate Z. So we do want to give it a little bit of rotation. The rotation here is good, but if we go to this next one, if we just do a little bit of rotate X, now we're going to really get the feeling that the ball is being directional. Okay, so now it's going to find its shape, and we want to do the same thing on the other end, but the opposite way. Okay, so now we get the feeling that it's really moving in a directional manner. Okay, so let's just take a quick look. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. Okay, so now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take this concept and lessen it ooh boy. Okay, so the reason the timeline turned red was I've selected everything, and that's a means of copying and pasting groups of keys, which we'll get into a little bit later. All right, it's really helpful. Okay, so now what we're going to want to do is, we notice as the ball bounces lower and lower, then the squash and stretch is going to become less and less, because the forces of gravity and impact are going to be less and less. So we want to let's just start with the scale. We'll take this here at 33, drag it to the next one, which I think is here, and key this, right? I think that's this one. Yep, that's about right. And then the next time it's on the ground that's at 91. So we want to take this, I'm sorry, 90. Key selected, etc., etc. So, but what we also want to do is we want to get that contrast in there, right? So we can take this 32, drag it to 34, right? Because it's going to stretch there as well. Key selected, then drag it, then take this middle mouse, drag it to here. Oops, I'm sorry, I hit S. I don't want to do that because I don't want to key the other values. Control Z to change it. So again, from here, middle mouse drag to 64. I said middle mouse drag to 64. Right click on that, and we're just keying the scale just to get this. Now, I'm going to do the same thing. Let me just double check to make sure it all makes sense. So yeah, you see how as we toggle through these, we're getting the same sense of contrast here. And then the next one is going to be at 90. So we want to take this, take it to there. It's a little bit tedious, but boy, it's a lot easier than drawing it, that's for sure. All right. Okay, so we've got our basic elements there, and now we're going to mess with the scale to get the sense of the lessening impact.